Viewing or listening to this podcast confirms acceptance of the disclaimer visible on your screen or found at authorscott.com/podcast. Welcome to the Regaining Health and Humanity podcast. I'm Dr. Scott Johnson, your guide on this journey to natural well-being. Here we explore evidence-based insights, revolutionary breakthroughs, and powerful health strategies that not only inform, but inspire change. Together, we'll uncover the mysteries of human existence and unlock the secrets to thriving. This podcast is more than just knowledge. It's your catalyst for unleashing extraordinary potential. Get ready. Your journey to boundless health and happiness starts now. Before we begin, this episode includes discussions about sexual assault, which may be triggering for some listeners. Please take care of yourself and feel free to skip this episode if needed. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Regaining Health and Humanity podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Johnson, and as always, I am grateful you are listening and hope you will find today's episode beneficial. If you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know that the lower level needs have to be met before our higher level needs can be fully realized. These lower level needs include our basic physiological needs such as food and water, sleep, and shelter. Then just above that is safety, which includes security, stability, order, and protection from harm. That's why today's episode is going to focus on safety in the form of self-defense tactics and techniques for women and children. Now, before you men tune out, even if you're a male, you'll want to listen because chances are you have a female in your life that you love and want to know the information that is going to be shared. So to discuss this topic, I've invited Jennifer Robinson to the podcast. Jennifer is the Senior Coordinator and Lead Instructor of the Rape Aggression Defense, shortened as r.a.d., so you'll probably hear us say r.a.d. a lot in this, and r.a.d.KIDS program at the Utah County Sheriff's Office. She has taught thousands of women and children valuable personal safety and self-defense skills in her 18 years there. She holds certifications in r.a.d. Systems Basic Physical Defense, Advanced Self-Defense, Weapons, and Keychain Defense courses, as well as r.a.d. for seniors, teens, and r.a.d.KIDS. Jen and her husband, Jeff, live in South Utah County and are parents to 4 incredible daughters and grandparents to 2 adorable grandsons. So welcome, Jen, and thank you for making the time to talk about this important topic.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, these programs are important and near and dear to my family's heart. And my wife is an instructor in the program and is very passionate about these programs. And I've had my daughters who have had opportunities to take the program as well. I really am an advocate for the program. Every time I get an opportunity to talk about it and try and steer people towards these programs, I do so. What I really want to start out is kind of set the stage by asking, why is the sense of safety and security so fundamental to our well-being, particularly from the perspective of Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yeah, when I was in high school and I was in college, we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I started out majoring in early childhood education and then thought I would switch it to elementary and then thought I would switch it to social work. And then you get married and you have kids and everything changes. But I remember when that topic would come up, there was something to me that was like, and I try to stay awake and there's all the little pyramid and the things to remember. And I don't know why it just didn't resonate with me. It was just something you had to memorize to pass the class.
Mm-hmm.
Once I took the class as a participant, I had the opportunity to take the r.a.d. Women class about 20 years ago. And then as my children got to take the class in r.a.d.KIDS, and then as I became an instructor, it all made sense. So Abraham Maslow theorized that our goal in life is self-actualization, right? To reach our highest potential, to be all we can be. And he said, there are certain steps that have to be met in order for us to achieve that. And that first base being we need food and shelter.
Mm-hmm.
Check. He doesn't say what kind of shelter. He doesn't say what kind of food. You just got to have it. It's got to work for you. And I often joke in my classes, you can live in a van down by the river and eat SpaghettiOs 3 times a day. And if you're good with it, that's your food, that's your shelter. You're great. or, whatever your situation is, but it's fundamental that we have that. And the next step is safety. The next step is security. And this is so important. And I'm going to reference a book, Gavin de Becker, The Gift of Fear. Because when we have fear, it does two things. Fear either owns you, or fear controls everything in your life, or fear can be your very best friend. And fear can help you identify some of those blind spots or some of those things that we need to overcome, or something that is holding us back from reaching that highest potential. And I often will ask participants in our class, think of something that has been a profound fear for you in your life, whether it's afraid of deep water, afraid of heights, afraid of public speaking, or something of a sort. And how did you overcome that fear? And what did it hold you back from? The common denominator in all of those answers is education. Education is the only solution to overcome fear, whatever it is. So as women, Gavin de Becker says, we fear something every day. Every day there's something that we fear. And I thought about that once, and I asked my husband, is there anything that you fear or think of, boogeyman for your safety every day? And he thought about it and he said, no, not really. And I thought, but I do. Because, and maybe not an innate, terrified fear, but maybe I go to the grocery and I'm mindful of where I'm parking. Or I'm mindful of that person that's looking at me with that side eye that I'm like, why are you looking at me like that? Or I'm mindful of, did I lock the doors at night? Did everything get shut down? My husband's out of town or whatnot. And so there are just things that we fear every day. And personal safety is a common denominator, a common fear of women. Sometimes I feel like there are a lot of cultures that women grow up in where we depend on a man for our safety, or we depend on a security system, or we depend on a dog, or we depend on a weapon. And those are all great. We don't want to eliminate any options that we have for self-protection. But when there's not a security system, when there's not a man, when there's not a dog, when there's not a weapon, who do we have to rely on? We rely on ourselves. So it's really important that we overcome a fear that we might have of our personal safety so that we can continue on that pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we can achieve that highest potential and that self-confidence and that self-value. And again, the only way to overcome fear is education. And so I love the education that these programs provide women and children and men too. R.A.D. also has a R.A.D. for men, because it helps us identify what those fears are, learn how to overcome them, and then move on and experience things in life that we may not have had the opportunity to do otherwise.
I think that that's important for people to realize, is that it is about empowering people with understanding, with awareness, with training. There's I see frequently on social media this debate that is constant about, we need to teach men and our boys and our sons to treat women better and have greater respect. And then the other coin is, well, we also need to teach our daughters and our wives and the women in our lives to be aware and to be able to protect themselves. And often people shift to one side or the other. And I'm always, why are we going one side or the other? It's both. We want to teach both of those things. We do want our sons to have better respect and to treat women better so that they don't have to have these fears that you're mentioning. Or at least have them as pressing on their mind as they are. But we also want women to be empowered to know how to behave if they are out in certain situations, to be aware of people and their surroundings and certain tactics that people use. Because let's just be honest, there are people, I'll use the term monsters. There are monsters that are out here in the world that no matter how much we teach them to treat women with respect and kindness, they're not going to do it. And which is why I'm very a strong advocate of this program, because I think it does give that empowerment to women.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
even children. My wife has had me come in and help at our local school, which she volunteered at for years and gave a lot of her hours and time to. Had me come and be a participant in it. And it was interesting to watch the kids use their skills and to be able to avoid situations and to learn from the scenarios that they're put through. I want to talk a little bit about this program because I think probably the majority of my listeners are probably going, I've never even heard of this program. So can you share a bit about the origins and purpose of the rape aggression defense system for women, and then also r.a.d.KIDS for children, and how these programs empower women and children?
Yes, exactly. And I want to just spin on that word a little bit that you said, empowerment. We're going to use that word a lot probably in this conversation. And one of the greatest definitions that I heard someone give once of empowerment is the ability to take control.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're empowering women in self-defense, we're empowering them to take control. And when you educate and empower a woman in her safety, in her personal safety, it changes the context of an assault, and a child too. We often think that and you said there's these monsters. Exactly. And evil does not discriminate. Identify doesn't only go after a certain gender or a certain socioeconomic type. But when you are able to educate and empower a individual in personal safety and self-defense, it changes the context of the assault. And by that, I mean, we oftentimes think that if I'm standing here and someone comes up behind me and wraps me up in a bear hug tight, who does it appear has more control and more power? That guy behind me, right? He's bigger, he's taller, he's stronger.
Mm-hmm.
But if I have been taught and I've been educated, number one, no one has the right to hurt me, not this guy. And I have been educated in what my personal weapons are and what his vulnerable locations are, he can't protect all of those vulnerable locations in his effort to take control of me.
Mm-hmm.
So what personal weapons are accessible to me, what vulnerable locations are available, and that's where I'm going, and those are my targets. And that's why it changes the context of the situation, is I get to be in control. Now, there are a lot of things that I can do. And so when in the founding of r.a.d., this is actually a national program and international, Canada, Mexico, Japan, the UK, it exists, or they've started up courses over there. But in the late 80s, there was a man named Larry Nadeau. He's the founder of r.a.d. And he had martial arts experience, he had law enforcement experience, military experience. And he was working in campus police after those work experiences and those careers. He was working campus police at Old Dominion in Virginia, Old Dominion University, and he knew there was a need for self-defense to be taught to women. But as he was working on campus, he realized that this was a great need. And in his military experience and in his law enforcement experience, he had investigated sex crimes as part of his job. And there was a common theme that he saw in those survivors that he interviewed and worked with, and that was two things. One, he commonly said, I didn't know that I could say no, and I didn't know I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to get out. I didn't know how to escape. And so he took his experience in military, he took his experience in law enforcement, he took his experience in martial arts, and he started to put together a series of techniques that he felt the average woman could do. And he would try them out with his mom. And if his mom was able to do them, it made the cut. And if it wasn't very easy for his mom to do, then he would make some adjustments and refine some things so that it was easy for her to do. Because he wanted this to be accessible and available to every woman of every age, of every size, of every health condition. And it was. And he came up with 27 techniques and developed this program. It turned into more systems. It's the r.a.d. systems of self-defense. And there is a program for men, for seniors, for teens. And there's advanced, there's weapons, there's keychain. there's a whole lot of options for people to learn how to protect themselves.
What are some common misconceptions people have about self-defense training, especially for women and children?
I often hear, when I'm at a booth for a safety fair or the county fair or whatnot, women will come up and hear about it, and they'll think it's great for their kids, and they'll say, I'm too out of shape. I'm too old. I couldn't do something like that. I have arthritis. I have a bad back. And to that, again, I say every woman of every age, of every size, of every health condition can do this, and children too. I've taught children who there was a little boy once that I taught that had cerebral palsy and had crutches, and we were able to teach him. And there were some things that he couldn't do. but there was a lot that he could do. We focused on that. We recently had a woman in our class that was in a wheelchair, and not 100% of the time, but she was recovering from a very debilitating illness, and she was in a wheelchair most of the time. There was quite a bit that she was able to learn. And when she came to the class, she was with her daughter, and she said, she kind of came to me before class and had tears in her eyes. And she said, I'm here because I really want my daughter to learn this. And I feel so vulnerable in this wheelchair. I just want to know if there's anything that I can do. And if not, I'll step back and I'll just, I'll be here to observe my daughter. And I said, I think there's a lot you'll find that you can do. And there was, and it was such an empowering experience. The youngest I've ever taught in a women's class is 12. The oldest I've taught in a women's class is 76. And she was a fun lady. She came in and thought there really wasn't anything for her. She was here for her daughter and her granddaughter. And by the time we got through the class, we asked at the end, what's something that you'll take away from this experience? And we add the Kubaton to our program. And so this is an additional training. This is a weapon that you put on your keys. We teach this.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of that class, she said, well, I thought I was just 76 and I just went to Costco and the temple and I was just here to support my family. But she said, and she got serious and she said, but now I know if you put a Kubaton in my hand, I will make you blind and sterile.
Yeah.
She found some empowerment. She found that there were things that worked for her, and she really loved the Kubaton techniques that we taught.
Yeah, I find those Kubatons, they're in our house, they're in our cars, they're in purses. They're just always accessible as one of the weapons that's available in case it's ever needed. You mentioned some of the ways maybe that the r.a.d.KIDS or the r.a.d. techniques for women are different than maybe a traditional martial arts. They're geared towards various levels and various ages, so that they seem like they're just an easier thing to pick up than maybe some other martial arts. You're not going to memorize a kata and do all these different moves.
Right.
So can you go a little bit further into how these self-defense techniques taught in r.a.d. women and r.a.d. kids differ from traditional martial arts?
Sure. I think one of the things that makes the program different too is that it's a very comprehensive curriculum for both children and for women. In the kids program, we teach 16 techniques, 16 physical defense techniques for the kids. And in the women's, we teach 27. We also, like I said, add the Kubaton, and so there's another 20 with that. But a typical course, and I'll kind of break it down for women's and kids, in our kids program, it's 12 hours, but we break it down into 6 2-hour classes.
Mm-hmm.
First part of the class, there's some lecture and discussion. We talk about risk-reducing strategy. What's a stranger? What's a trick? What's a password? And we learn about drugs, guns, bullies, dogs. I mean, there's a whole gamut of information that we learn. But every technique that these children learn, there's a drill that goes with it. They get to practice. And the philosophy is the first time a child escapes danger shouldn't be in real life. Unfortunately, we have had children who have experienced danger and who have been victimized that have come to our class. But they get to practice it, so it develops this muscle memory of, here's the concept I learned, now I've practiced it, I'm running and telling. And all of the r.a.d.KIDS curriculum is taught on the foundation of 3 things. The first one being, no one has the right to hurt you because you're special. That means the most valuable, the most important. You can't be replaced. And no one means no one. It doesn't matter if you know them, if you don't know them, if they're 5 or 105, it means no one. Now, sidestepping a little bit, statistically, that's important to know, because when a child is physically or sexually assaulted, 96% of the time, they know the person who has hurt them. For women, it's 88% of the time. So, there's a lot of programs that put emphasis on the danger of strangers, and I'm not throwing shade on any of those programs. I think any personal safety education is important. But when we know that the statistics show that it's more likely to be a family acquaintance, a neighbor kid, a family member, a friend, then we understand why that's important to know. No one has the right to hurt you. The second concept we teach in r.a.d.KIDS is you don't have the right to hurt anyone else.
Right.
Including yourself, unless someone is physically hurting you or preventing you from getting to safety, and then you can stop them. And in this class, we're going to show you how. We show them how to use their voice, how to use a stance, how to use their personal weapons, their elbows, their hands, their knees, their feet, and their head, and how to use those in an effort to stop somebody. Then the third, to escape, because the goal is escape. We're not teaching, and that's what's a little bit different than from martial arts, is some martial arts programs are developed to win the opponent, to take control. There's a lot of competition that's involved, and there's a lot of time. There's a lot of practice. There's a lot that goes into that, and the average woman doesn't usually have that kind of time, and the kids are already involved in 15,000 other things. And so we wanted to make, or that RAD wanted to make this something simple that someone could come in and learn, come back and practice, but let's give you the information you need in 12. For kids, it's 12 hours. If you do simulation for the women, 9 to 12 hours. And then the third component of building this foundational mindset is in r.a.d.KIDS, if anyone ever has hurt you or tricked you or made you feel bad inside, it's not your fault.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell someone. And this is so important. We teach these 3 things actually in our women's program as well. But this is so important because this allows a person to understand that they can move from being a victim to a survivor. It's not your fault. And you can tell someone. Sometimes someone who has been victimized doesn't want to report it. They don't want to talk about it, but they want to heal and they want to move forward and they want to take these classes. But we want them to know that they have the option and that it can be important to report. It can be important to tell, but they get to make that choice. So in a typical r.a.d.KIDS class, we teach these 3 things. We go through all of this curriculum. They practice the drills. Then the last about 45 minutes of class, we learn these physical defense techniques. And they practice, there's a dynamic impact to it. So we demonstrate it, we explain it. There's repetitions that we do. Then there's dynamic impact where they're practicing on the pads. And then we have dynamic simulation. Mm-hmm. And it's the same, follows the same suit in the women's program as well. And in that dynamic simulation, we have instructors who are certified to do this, who go through a specific and special certification. They pad up in they're called red man suits, but they're actually black. Mm-hmm. And it's about 40 pounds of foam and rubber with protective gear. And then the student gets to wear protective gear. And we create scenarios. It's not Fight Club. The goal of the aggressor is not to defeat them, but we create these scenarios. Everybody gets the same scenario where they get to practice the techniques and the skills that they've learned in a safe environment on a real person. So that they know when they do that sweep kick to the groin, they know what that feels like when it lands. Or when they drop that hammer fist onto the nose, they know, even though it's a cage and they're wearing protective gear, they know what that feels like when that person goes back because of the impact of that strike. And they know what it feels like when they're released and they're able to run to safety. So the women's program is similar. We have risk-reducing strategies that we talk about in the women's program as well, and we learn these techniques. Your question of how is this a little bit different than martial arts is that we try to teach techniques that are quick and deliberate. So something that you can do in 2 or 3 strikes to get your attacker to release so that you have an opportunity to escape. Mm-hmm. The goal is to escape.
How can parents help their children feel more secure and prepared without instilling fear or anxiety? Because I think that's a fine line. Talking about these things can make children fearful and scared about that kind of situation, but it is something that they need to be aware of. And so how do you balance those 2 things?
Oh, that's a great question because we see that come up sometimes in the women's program too. We by nature create our own boogeymen. That's just what we do. And if you're an individual who has anxiety, you create a lot more boogeymen sometimes, right? Especially when we're talking about safety and fear for our personal safety. So one of the things that I talk about when I'm teaching is we want our participants to be prepared and not paranoid. One of the ways that we do that for the kids program is that we require an adult, a parent or guardian, to attend the class with a child so that they hear the same information, so that they're on the same page. And I'll give you an example. We had a little girl in our class once who I think she was 9 years old. And one of the concepts that we were teaching was home safety. And in home safety, it was if someone knocks on the door, take a grown-up with you to the door, look out and see who's there first. We don't open the door for people that we don't know. And her mom called me a couple of days after we taught that class. And she said, I don't know what to do, but my daughter is so afraid of either one of us opening the door now. She just, like the doorbell rings and she doesn't even want me to answer it. In the course of the conversation, I found that the townhome that mother and daughter lived in had no windows by the doors and it was kind of down a little hallway. And so there was no way to see who was behind the door. And the rule had been if somebody comes to the door, mom would tell daughter, I want you to run upstairs to your bedroom and just wait until I tell you that it's okay to come down. Because then we'll know if it's grandma or grandpa, we'll know if it's a salesman, we'll know whatever. And so this daughter would run up. Well, what she's learned in r.a.d.KIDS is she's got some empowerment. She's taking control of this thing that she fears. And she's learned, well, there's a safer way to do it. We can call out who's there and we can look out a window, except we don't have a window. So when mom and daughter had more of a conversation, what it was is daughter realized there's a safer way to do this, but how do we make this safer? And mom said, maybe we can get a peephole. And that's what they did. They went down to Home Depot. They actually were friends of ours. My husband went over and put that peephole in for him. And she said, that was it. That was all it took. was, so it was great to have mother and parent and child there, because had that not occurred, this child would have gone home. Mom wouldn't have understood why she was scared and what was happening in the class, but they were able to have this conversation because they both knew the information and they were able to come up with a solution. And that's what we want people to do. In part of being prepared, it's coming up with solutions. It's having a plan. What's my plan if this happens? What's my plan if that happens? And so to kind of combat that fear, in the women's class, I can see sometimes the boogeyman being created, and then there'll be a question. Well, what if he does this? Well, what if the person does that? And my answer is oftentimes, with all of the information that we've learned so far, what do you think you could take from what we've learned um, to solve that question or to answer that question? And they'll kind of look at me like, well, and then they kind of walk through some of the stuff. Well, I guess I could do this, and I could take, and I could, exactly. Yeah, great. Yeah, you're going in the right direction. That's awesome. And if they kind of get stuck and they're like, well, that's why I'm asking you, because I really don't know what I would do. Then I present the question, what personal weapons are available to you? And what vulnerable locations are accessible? And then they go, oh, okay, well, if I was wrapped this way, then I would have a heel kick and I would have a headbutt. And then they start walking through. And so again, the only way that we overcome fear is through education. And so let's take those answers from the education we've learned, and then let's figure out how to answer them. And then you can kind of see that shift from paranoid to prepared. And, does it work every time? I don't know. But are there still people that are going to have some nerves and be concerned? Sure. We also talk about breathing in our class. And we have 2 instructors that we've sent to a special certification to come back and teach our participants. In law enforcement, they call it combat breathing, but how to kind of slow that mindset down, that to take that amygdala that's running wild and come back to the prefrontal cortex that says, okay, I got a plan. I know what to do. And we do that through breathing. And so that's one of the things that we teach in our program as well.
We kind of mentioned this earlier, but what role does situational awareness play in personal safety, and how can individuals improve this skill? I think this is one of the most important things, because if you can avoid the situation altogether, that's obviously the best case scenario.
Absolutely. The only confrontation you are ever guaranteed to win is the one you're not at, right? And that's what we say in our little r.a.d.KIDS class too. The only best fight you're ever in is the one you're not at. So situational awareness is huge. I teach that awareness is a choice. So we talk about the 4 risks in r.a.d. There's risk awareness, risk avoidance, risk recognition, risk reduction. And I when I key in on that awareness, I always introduce it with awareness is a choice. Some people are just very innately aware of their surroundings, but the reason that's a choice is the reticular activating system. So that's this system that we have. We all have it. Everybody's got it. And its only purpose is to identify things that have immediate threat or immediate value. But we have to tell it what to pay attention to. So the example that I always give in classes or in presentations is, who here has bought a car recently? Someone will say, oh, I just bought a black Toyota RAV4. Okay, great. And when you bought that, what did you notice driving around town? Everybody has a black Toyota RAV4.
Yeah.
Or you were even thinking about buying it. Now all of a sudden, because you were thinking about it, you see it all over. That's our reticular activating system. And when I'm talking with youth, I'll say, who's school shopping, and you see this cute pair of jeans, and all of a sudden, what do you notice? Everybody's wearing that style of jeans. Or you see a hairstyle and you go, oh, I wonder if I could pull that off. Could I do that color? Could I do that style? And you see that everywhere. So if our reticular activating system can point out and call out things of value to us, that simple, what can it do to save our life? What if we say to ourselves, I want to be aware of people that make me feel uncomfortable. I want to be aware of where my exits are. I'm in this building that I've never been in before. I don't think we can watch the news one day in our life without hearing about a public shooting somewhere. So I'm in this new building. Where are my exits? If I need to get out quickly, where would they go? And guess what's going to happen? We're going to recognize those people that make us feel a little uncomfortable, that we think might be trying to manipulate us. We're going to recognize those exits in this building that we're in. They're going to see the signs everywhere because we've told ourselves to be aware of it. And so awareness is so important, and it's so easy to do once we tell ourselves what we want to be aware of.
What advice would you give to someone considering starting self-defense training, but they may feel intimidated or unsure about where to even begin?
I say just do it. Just do it. Just sign up. And even if you feel like, I don't know if it's for me and I don't know if I'm, come and watch. Just come and watch. We had a participant years ago whose therapist suggested that this might be a helpful component in her healing from something that she'd been through. And she showed up for the class, and you could kind of feel the hesitation as they introduced myself to her. And we the lecture and discussion portion, and in that we introduced our instructors, several of which here at the Utah County Sheriff's Office are deputies, they're law enforcement. She was very uncomfortable that there were male instructors in the class. We have male and female. And she was even more uncomfortable that some of them were law enforcement.
Mm.
And that was a no-go for her. So she stayed out and she sat, she observed. She came to every class, but she observed. She just watched. That was her comfort zone. That was her level. That's what she felt okay doing. And she came back after that. She came back a second time because she knew what to expect. She saw how things went down and she felt better about coming back to do it.
I want to talk just briefly about maybe you've shared that story that you've had where somebody felt empowered, and sometimes they do go back twice. I know my wife, she may have taken the class 3 times before deciding to be an instructor.
Yes.
So
We may
she
have
went back many times because she just enjoyed it so much. But what psychological benefits have you observed in women and children who complete the r.a.d. programs?
Confidence, the ability to recognize things again because of that situational awareness, recognizing things that they may not have seen before, and not from the vantage point of paranoia, but from the vantage point of preparedness. I think of women who, and like I say, we have people who have come through that have unfortunately experienced sexual abuse or sexual assault. We have women who never experienced anything. Same in the kids programs. I don't know unless they tell me, unless that's something they feel comfortable sharing with me. But there have been many times that I have been out in public. I remember a time that I was walking through Target and a participant in a class that we just had in a women's class walked up to me and, hi, and Jen, and how are you doing? And then she said, I want to tell you that when I was in college, something happened to me. And it just has been so hard for me all these years. And taking your class was the first time that I really started to feel confident and felt like this is something that I don't have to carry with me anymore. And I feel like it's time I can start healing. And I think what she was saying was she felt like she had some control. And they're realizing that what happened was not her fault and that she doesn't have to be a victim again. And we can't guarantee that the things that we teach will guarantee that no one ever will be a victim, but we guarantee that the people we teach have more options and that they have more choices. I think of a child that we had come through class several years ago that had been terribly sexually assaulted. And it was dropped in the investigation, and there were no charges that went forward with the perpetrator. And this child was just shutting down. And someone who knew the family knew of these programs and suggested to the family, maybe for this. And they did. And this child, and I'm trying to be careful with anonymity, so I don't want to say male or female, but this child in class was so timid when we were talking about learning how to yell and how to use our voice and the difference between yelling and screaming. And we would get a whisper, no, no. No eye contact. No. We kept working. We kept going. We kept learning. And at the very end, when we got to that dynamic simulation portion, this child was on fire. And I was surprised that he wanted to do the simulation. But as their hand was grabbed, they came up with this hammer fist and they were standing behind the aggressor. And the look on that child's face was just full of, I will not let you hurt me. And they dropped that hammer fist and ran to safety, and we clapped and cheered. And the mutual friend who had recommended this said that the parent contacted them a few days later and said that when that child went to therapy, they had a hard time talking about what had happened and not really wanting to engage in any sort of conversation or dialogue about that, but showed up at therapy and was ready to talk about it and was ready to discuss and to work on some of that. And I thought, what a gift. What a gift. And we've heard stories similar on both sides several times with participants who have had the ability to overcome a fear to gain that education to overcome that fear. And then, as we talked about Maslow's theory of hierarchy, become self-actualized and move closer to that self-actualization.
I'm sure that you have a lot of those kind of stories, and that's probably some of the most rewarding parts of being in the program is hearing the people's stories and seeing their results and how their life has been improved. So I'm very grateful for everybody involved in the program. I especially think that the men or women who put on those suits and allow themselves to be beat up pretty good, because you know what? The padding, while it does have some protection, there's still going to be some damage that you're going to endure while you're wearing that.
Yes.
And so I'm really grateful for everybody that's involved in these programs that just help women and children, and also seniors and men who want to be involved in the program. I think the last question, but super important because we need to know how people can connect to this program and get this training, is how can people find a class, or how do they get involved in these programs?
Yes, yes. So if you're in the United States, there is a program locator for the women's program. You're going to go to rad-systems.com,
Mm-hmm.
rad-systems.com. You can click on the states, find your state, and look at the local programs that are in your area. Same with the r.a.d.KIDS. You can go to r.a.d.KIDS.org and find your state, find a program in your area, or reach out to the system administrator on the r.a.d.KIDS website and send an email and tell them what you're looking for. If you're in Utah, specifically if you're in Utah County, you can go to rad.utahcounty.gov.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go to rad.utahcounty.gov, there's a brief explanation of each of the programs. And if you scroll down, it says take a class. And if you hover in that paragraph on scheduling page, it will take you to a Google site where we have all of our classes listed for the year and the dates, the times, and then there's an online registration available through that as well.
Great. Well, again, any of the listeners, I encourage you to go investigate. Like Jen said, jump into it, do it, and do it to your comfort level. If you do need to just sit on the sidelines and watch, at least you're learning some things as you're sitting there and watching. But I strongly encourage anybody to go and take these programs, get yourself prepared, be more confident, be empowered, and reduce that fear that we talked about, and establish more safety and security in your life by having the proper training. Thank you so much for being on and for all you're doing as part of the program, and all of the instructors that you work with and the deputies that are involved. I think that it's such a great service to the community, and I hope people will take advantage of it.
Thank you. I do too. And I'd like to add, if you do take the course that the Utah County Sheriff's Office provides, Sheriff Smith makes this course available free of charge to any participants that take it through our program. He's carried on the philosophy of Sheriff Tracy before him that when and where possible, people shouldn't have to pay to learn how to be safe. And we're very fortunate that we've had administration here in the Sheriff's Office and also county commissioners that continue to approve a budget that makes it possible for us to offer this program to the community free of charge. So I appreciate Sheriff Smith in that the programs that he makes available to this community. If you're taking it elsewhere in the nation, there may be a small fee, but most programs don't charge more than just what they need to cover some of the overhead. Usually it's anywhere from $25 to $65, which for 12 hours of self-defense training is a pretty good deal. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here, Dr. Johnson. Thank you for helping share the information on this super valuable subject.
You bet. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. I hope you've gained insights to elevate your health and life. For more transformative evidence-based wisdom, I invite you to explore my 20-plus books at authorscott.com/shop. Don't miss out on the chance to supercharge your health and guide others to a better life. Like, share, and subscribe to join the movement transforming lives. Here's to your journey toward boundless health and happiness.